Good morning. Good morning, everybody, and a special welcome to our primary audience, Dr. Cheryl Ogilvie and the Tshwane University of Technology. Now, my name is Aisha, and my co-host today is Prudence. Please wave, Prudence. And she will be handling the Q&A session. Today's talk forms part of the Changing Hearts and Minds, Exploring Environmental Education in Africa. And so we get started. Many of you may have heard about the Wildlife Clubs of Kenya. It is a charitable, non-profit organization formed in 1968 by Kenyan students. It was the first conservation education program of its kind on the continent of Africa and was said to be the most effective grassroots program of its kind in all of Africa. Programs by this club include Kumba Magazine, ecology programs, mobile education unit, art and essay competitions, material production, activities, and competitions. Now, our speaker today is the head of the Conservation Education Program in Kenya with the Wildlife Clubs of Kenya. Silas Ekesa was born in Western Kenya and grew up foraging from the forest to get food and herbs. He went to a local school, and his coexistence with wildlife then led him into wildlife conservation. He has worked with this local NGO for 12 years and spent most of his time instilling conservation knowledge to kids in learning institutions in Kenya from primary school right up until tertiary institutions. He is an alumnus of the Humphrey Fellowship, a Fulbright exchange program from the University of California in Davis, USA. Now, he's currently working on the Reticulated Giraffe Awareness Program to create awareness about the significance of this endangered species. But his interest is in habitat restoration and sustainable agricultural practices, as most of his projects aim at improving ecosystem health, combating climate change, and improving community livelihood. And so with that, I hand over to you, Silas.
Thank you, Aisha, for the brief introduction, and everybody, I hope you are doing well and you are ready to have this interactive session. As she mentioned earlier on, my name is Silas and I work with the Wildlife Clubs of Kenya, and I am the Conservation Education Officer in the Mount Kenya region. I'm hoping that as we continue interacting throughout this session, we'll be learning from each other and gaining some insights on how we can run environmental education as individuals, as a country, as a region, as a continent, as a world. So I'm going to jump into sharing my presentation. So this is me, and today we are going to talk about the role of conservation education in combating climate change. All these other things have been mentioned, and so I'm just going to go straight to the second slide. So let's talk about who Silas is before we can jump into the topic. Aisha mentioned briefly that I was brought up in a village, and it's a typical explanation of a village where I was born. And I went to a very local school. It was a very adjacent school. We would mostly just walk to school. But the good thing about where I went to is that I was actually born in an area that has about 3 forests. We had one of the biggest one being the Kakamega forest, and another one there is the Malawa forest. And then there was one that was very close to us. We used to go in there, hide in there, forage, get some fruits and roots. And that interaction with the forest made me like develop some passion for forest conservation, because I realized you could just get like just about everything that you need to survive from the forest. My mom never had any formal education. My dad went, was just a primary school dropout, but he was lucky to get a job with one of the forest custodians in Kenya, is forest ranger. And it is his, like most of the time he talked to us about what he does, how he protects the forest, how he handles poachers. And I think those are some of the things that drove me into thinking, maybe we need more forest protectors in future. And all the way in my primary school, I was in the 4K club. I went to high school. I was a member of the Wildlife Club, actually. And when I was a member of the Wildlife Club in high school, I never knew that Wildlife Club is an organization. I thought it's just a wildlife club in the school. I started realizing it's an organization when I was in the college because we would get some membership cards. And that's when I learned that this is actually an environmental education organization. So I pursued wildlife management out of my passion for conservation. I had so many ups and downs growing up, going to school because my parents did not have a lot of money to take us to school. So at some point I was in a children's home just to ensure that I don't drop out of school. And that's how I managed to wiggle my way through to what I am today. So right now, I'm so glad that I ended up where I am. Doesn't matter what it pays, but I think the most important part of this whole story of being an environmental educator is that you get to put a smile on people's faces. You get to create an army of future custodians and change makers and decision makers. And you get to derive that satisfaction out of seeing a smile on people's face, knowing that you have done something that has changed their life and has secured the future. So today, I'm so glad that I'm here to talk to you about a few things. And we will be having this brief introduction. We'll get to understand what conservation education is. We'll also, because we are talking about the role of conservation education in climate change, we'll need to understand what climate change is. We'll talk about the role of conservation education in climate change in general, and we'll have a case study from Wildlife Clubs of Kenya. Anyway, I mentioned WCK, just know it is Wildlife Clubs of Kenya. We'll talk about challenges and solutions, and we'll see what can we do as individuals, as organizations around the world. And then we'll have a question and answer session. I'll be happy to deal with some of your questions. Thank you and welcome, and let's see what we have to discuss today. So let's talk about the introduction of conservation education. If you go through literature and the history of conservation education, you realize that this conservation education started way back in the 19th century. And it was a movement that was started in the US by the Theodore Roosevelt. And I think there was another guy called John Muir who were very active in, championing for environmental education in the 19th century. They really worked so hard to ensure these things incorporated in our various school curriculum, but they did not manage to make it a formal kind of education in learning institutions. It was until 1930s that this conservation education started appearing in schools and in universities, and people started formalizing this kind of studies in schools. Institutions adopted the environmental education around the world. And with time, it grew to become a distinct field of study in the 1970s. And I think in the 1972, that's when it was recognized by the UN in Stockholm. I think this is Sweden. And so it formally became part and parcel of school curricula, or rather learning institutions around the world. So we have heard about the Education for Sustainable Development that was coined in 2004. It was to last for 10 years, but they had to change it, review it to what we have today as Sustainable Development Goals. The Millennium Development Goals, those are the ones that were supposed to take effect from 2004 to 2014. Today, we are working on SDGs. I remember we used to think that 2030 is like far, far away. Like if someone talked to you about achieving a goal and you felt it's not going to come very soon, you would say, this is Vision 2030. Now, Vision 2030 is just a few years ahead. And you can ask yourself as an individual, you set a goal like 5 years ago, and you need to achieve it by 2030, or as an organization. How far have you gone with your goals? And how soon do you think you're going to achieve these goals? Is it before 2030 in 2030 or after 2030. All right. So what is conservation education? Most of us who have been engaging in conservation education must have realized that we are dealing with people and we are talking about environmental conservation. So we are engaging people, and you don't just engage a specific age, because we are sweeping across ages, across backgrounds, cultural, political, whatever it is. And that's why environmental education, it involves engaging people. And these people are of all ages, have all the backgrounds, and we engage them in activities that can promote the conservation and sustainable use of our natural resources, the protection of biodiversity, and the preservation of ecosystems. We could say conservation of ecosystems as well, because as we continue protecting our resources, we are also using them sustainably. Although we have some areas that are definitely preserved, maybe the UNESCO heritage areas or historical sites, those ones are like definitely protected. So while we are engaging people, we are carrying out these awareness programs, and we are focusing on all ages. So sometimes people, hear us talking about youth a lot, or women groups, or girls, or boys, but you forget that you also need to talk about conservation education amongst the adults. And the word here is educating and engaging. So in educating, we are giving them what we understand, but in engaging, we might want to learn from what people also know about environmental education, because as we go out there in the field, it doesn't mean we know everything. We might be like, for example, working with indigenous groups. In as much as we come in with our modern science on matters of conservation, they also have their indigenous knowledge in conservation that we need to sit down and understand and learn from them before we can incorporate in our environmental education. So it's a two-way kind of traffic, and it's very important that we get to listen as we speak. And so what is climate change? For those who have been following climate change issues around the world, you'll realize that most of the causes, rather all of the causes of the climate change, are either human activities, of which most of them are human activities, and others are like natural climate variability, or what I would say anthropogenic causes. I mean, the natural and anthropogenic causes. So I would say, for example, if there is like a volcanic eruption, there would be some emissions from the volcanic mountains that definitely will contribute to global warming. But in most of these global warming issues, it has been increasing with time, and it all started showing an increase in the 1950s. I think when industrialization took flight at a very high speed, people started experiencing accumulation of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases in the ozone layer. And this problem we are facing today in terms of global warming, the changing climatic conditions, and the extreme weather condition that we face today is mostly contributed by the heavy industrialization. And so if you are following the debate on climate change, climate negotiation, you realize that there is a commitment by most of these developed nations. They are raising funds and giving to countries in Africa, in the global south, because as we all know that Africa is the least contributor to climate change, but it's the most vulnerable. And what we do mostly in Africa is try to extract CO2 or other greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. But these developed countries have been contributing to the rise of these greenhouse gases through industrialization. And so they need to compensate for that by giving us, or rather giving the countries in Africa money to run projects that can help extract the excess CO2 from the atmosphere. So the definition of climate change is it's a change that's attributed directly or indirectly to human activity that alters the composition of the global atmosphere, in addition to the natural climate variability observed over comparable periods. This is the official definition that was given by the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And as time goes, of course, there would be some changes in the definition of climate change based on what is happening, based on the negotiations, based on the panel discussions that happen by the climate experts around the world. So what is the role of conservation education in climate change? I wanted to pose a food for thought for you. I was sitting with some people and we were discussing issues, and someone said, do you know that if we don't mitigate climate change, we will lose some important insects in the world? For example, the bees the population of bees will decline, and this is most likely to lead to increased teen pregnancies. Can you think about that as we continue with this presentation? If you have if you can explain that to me, let's do that at the end of this presentation. But I think it's true that the declining population of bees in the world is most likely to escalate teen pregnancies amongst nations, especially in the countries that are hard hit by climate change. Think about it and let me know what your thoughts are at the end of this presentation. So one of the roles of conservation education in climate change is advocacy and policy. So I'm gonna let you know that there are various conservation policies, and they keep changing with change in climate change and goals. Okay, so through environmental education, advocacy ensures viable and solution-based policies, okay, that are adopted by different nations, okay? So this helps curb what we call misinformation and disinformation. I think we understand what it means, that if we don't have proper policies, if we don't have advocacy policies, then there would be a lot of misinformation and disinformation. Some of this is because someone is just malicious, or someone has a political goal that they want to achieve, and so they want to keep people, in the dark about some information as regards to climate change. Misinformation simply means like spreading inaccurate information without the intention to deceive anyone. But for disinformation, of which this one happens mostly, especially when people have a malicious, intent, they would deliberately spread information that is false. Okay, this could be any form of misleading information, okay, that they want to spread you, and they know very well that they are doing that because they definitely want to manipulate you. So they give you wrong information. All right. So having a conservation education program that is able to lobby for proper policies in conservation, having a conservation education program that is able to engineer or rather lead to the establishment of various advocacy bodies, advocacy groups, and giving factual information to people about exactly what is going on in the world of climate change could help demystify so many, stories about climate change that have been spread out there by people willing to, or intending to disinform the public. The other role of conservation education is to enhance sustainable practices. Now, sustainability here is key. And I think there are so many countries that are running various sustainable projects around the world. And if you have been following on the internet or reading news about sustainable practices around the world, you realize that most of the projects that are being run by international or local organizations in various countries to combat climate change are tailored to solve local solutions. And this is what I'm going to tell you, because there are 17 sustainable development goals. Okay? Each and every country has to identify which ones are the most prioritized in their country. like what is mostly affecting people in your country. And I'm going to tell you about my country, for example, Kenya. There's no way, for example, for us, there's no way we would go to an institute in those very dry areas and start talking to them about the effects of climate change and how they need to participate in waste management, how they need to participate in water conservation. And at that particular point, you are talking to a group of individuals who have spent like 3-4 days without food. People who have not even had water in the past 24 hours. So as a country or as an institution that is running environmental education, what is your priority when you are talking about sustainable practices in a community? If these people are facing poverty, the first thing you need to address is how is this conservation education programs or projects going to solve their problem fast before they can solve the problem of climate change? That's where it starts working out. If you don't address that fast, if you don't address their need fast, then you're not going to spread the right information. They'll not take into consideration the information that you give them. So as a country, as an institution, if poverty is the issue, let's see, how are we going to help these people develop projects that will add them some income so that we can now start incorporating those projects climate change. So for as an institution, let's say you are talking to a community that is living as a pastoral community, living in very dry areas, that they move from one place to another. They don't lead a settled life. So let's talk about what can you do to these people. First, you need to kind of promote a settled kind of lifestyle amongst this community. And you also need to generate income for them and help them understand that when they have the right number of livestock on their farm, or the right size of livestock, then that way they are able to enhance the ecosystem of that particular area because they are within the carrying capacity of that particular area. So we are talking about projects that will help them lead a settled life. And these are some of the projects that will help them now start listening to your idea of combating climate change. So the first thing you need to think about is, how am I going to ensure that these people are able to generate some income? They are able to get some pasture for their livestock without moving from one place to another. That way, you are reducing the amount of soil erosion. You are enhancing the carrying capacity. You are enhancing the soil productivity. And that way, you're able to help them settle down and live a more settled life. So sustainable practices is a very important component in combating climate change, because this way, then we are able to help people understand that the ecosystem only thrives if we take care of it as individuals, as institutions, and as nations. Another very important component of conservation education in combating climate change is awareness and understanding, you see. So this helps, kind of promote awareness about the environmental issues. And there are so many issues in the environment that we need to address as institutions. Some of them could be like habitat destruction, okay? There would be loss of biodiversity. Climate change is one of them, pollution, sustainable water management, rainwater harvesting, waste management. There are so many other topics that you can talk about in our understanding. And you realize that these topics connect very well with sustainable practices. Because as you talk about them, you are trying to give them the knowledge and understanding about what these practices are going to do to combat climate change. And this helps to enhance the understanding. Even though for those who are Christians, you realize that there is a holy book that mentions about people perishing due to lack of understanding, due to lack of knowledge. So sometimes, and I'm going to tell you, sometimes we think that, personally, I used to think that if you see someone like driving a very nice, Porsche car, I would think that those people are very knowledgeable. But I realized, being on the roads for some time, I've realized that is not the case. There are so many people out there who need this knowledge. I think this component of awareness and understanding sometimes can be opportunistic. Like you get just an opportunity to talk to someone about it, and you can do it anytime, anywhere. In this case, for example, you are if you're for example traveling on the road, and I'm sure some of you have seen these cases where there would be plastic bottles, papers flying out of car windows on the road, and people are dumping things here and there. You know, these people, it does not mean they don't have the knowledge. They have the knowledge about the impact of waste on the environment, but what they are lacking is the attitude. And that's that, kind of awareness that people need to understand that not everybody who is learned is aware or has the right attitude. You might have the knowledge, you might have the understanding, you might have you might have participated in those programs of environmental conservation, but if your attitude is not positive towards environmental conservation, then you'll not be able to participate actively in enhancing environmental education. So the component of awareness and understanding is very, very significant. So let's talk about our case. Within those like roles of conservation education in climate change, let's talk about specifically wildlife clubs of Kenya. And in this case, I'll be talking about WCK. If I mention WCK, just understand that that means wildlife clubs of Kenya. Wildlife clubs of Kenya, when I was talking about the history of conservation education, I said it was formalized in learning institutions in the 1970s. And I'm surprised that at that particular time, that's also when Wildlife Clubs of Kenya was established. In the year 1968, Wildlife Clubs of Kenya was established, and it also started just as a movement, like I mentioned, for the John Muir and Roosevelt. Back then, there are a lot of tourism happening in Kenya, but most of these tourists would be coming from abroad, coming from Europe or the Americas. And there was a group of students in one of these high schools in Kenya called Kagumo High School. They were interested in knowing why the schools don't get an opportunity to visit the parks because the cost was so high and they are not prioritized, because everyone was looking at how much are we earning from tourism. So they wrote a letter to somewhere they did not know, just to whom it may concern. The letter, kind of was moved around and here and there in various government departments until it ended up on the desk of the right department, and that was the wildlife department. And they got a reply. They were told, for you to get this subsidy on visiting the Kenyan parks, you will need to form a wildlife club. And that's how Wildlife Clubs of Kenya was formed. So you realize that initially, it just started as like a high school kind of club, but later it was incorporated in primary schools, high schools, and higher learning institutions. And today we do a lot of environmental program in higher learning institutions. And we also have a college at our headquarters. It's a center for tourism training and research. We have wildlife courses going on there. We have students learning about outdoor activities, excursions, tourist tour guiding, research, wildlife management, and so many other diploma courses out there. So that's how Wildlife Clubs of Kenya was established. Today, we have a memorandum of understanding with one of the wildlife protection agencies in Kenya. It's called the Kenya Wildlife Service. We have the privilege and opportunity to take our member schools to national parks, and the entry rates are subsidized to a level that most of these schools can be able to afford. And that's the role that we play, giving the youth the opportunity to access our wildlife areas, teaching them about wildlife conservation, tour guiding, and so many other things that we do in enhancing awareness, sustainability, and creating an army of future custodians. We are spread all over the country in Kenya. If you come in Kenya one of those days and you want to be like, oh, okay, I want to use the accommodation facility for Wildlife Clubs of Kenya, you could use our accommodation facility in Nairobi, in the Rift Valley, in Western Kenya, in coastal Kenya. You are free. And then when you are there, you can also learn about what we do. You can participate, you can volunteer. Lots of things that we do right there. And of course, you can go on our website and you will be able to learn more about what we do. So let's talk about awareness and understanding again in Wildlife Clubs of Kenya. So Wildlife Clubs of Kenya, as I mentioned earlier on, we work in primary schools, high schools, and higher learning institutions. Our program is developed in such a way that it's tailored to meet the demands of the age group that we are dealing with. We have various activities that we run in primary schools, in high schools, and in colleges. And just to mention a few examples, is we do a lot of waste management programs in primary and secondary schools. We do a lot of climate negotiation programs in high schools and colleges. We have been doing a lot of waste management and agriculture practices. We have had several greenhouses established in learning institutions through Wildlife Clubs of Kenya to help students understand how they can do farming in small spaces. We have done permaculture practices in schools, and we also access the school community through schools, because we mostly work directly with schools, but we are able to convene training programs for teachers, and teachers being part of the parent community around schools. Then we are able to reach out to the rest of the school community that is not directly impacted by our programs. We do both field-based activities and also, like theoretical talks in classes, just to help enhance the understanding of the challenges that we face. Most of these programs that we do in these schools are tailored to meet the demands of the schools, and also to help schools understand the specific problems or challenges, environmental challenges that they face within their school community. There are schools in Kenya that have the challenge of persistent drought, schools in Kenya that have the challenges of persistent poaching. There are other areas that have persistent human-wildlife conflict. And so when we are designing our programs, we ensure that they meet these challenges and we are able to address them and come up with solutions together with these school communities. And that's how we help them understand the problem they face and how they can also tailor solutions to what they face. This way, we are able also to promote like the peaceful coexistence between human and wildlife. And as a result, we are also helping these ecosystems where these human-wildlife conflicts exist to, kind of regenerate those kind of environments and help them enhance kind of the ecosystem that is able to accommodate wildlife without having to fight for resources between the wildlife and the people. We also work with people and other institutions and organizations that help mitigate the challenges that various institutions face. When it comes to awareness and understanding, it's very important that when you are as an individual, if you are doing environmental education and you are visiting an institution, it's very important that you help students understand, or rather the community understand the why of your program. Most of us would go and like most of these communities, even the learners in these learning institutions, when you leave, what they will remember is what? Like, oh, he talked about the human-elephant conflict, or he talked about saving or conserving water. But why? It's very important that you talk about why. And I have had this experience before. I went to a school somewhere, and there were these kids that were, every time the bell rang and they were going outside, they would wash their hands. When they're coming back to class, they would wash their hands. And I asked them, why are you washing your hands? And some of them would be like, we are washing hands because our teacher told us to do so. Is that really the why? You see, you need to explain, you need to, break down the reasons why you are teaching kids to do certain things so that they can understand why it matters even in future. But if they only understand what, it doesn't go into the future. It remains where it is in the present time. So it's very important that we make them understand these issues. Sustainable practices. You see, WCK as an institution has been on the forefront of enhancing sustainable practices in learning institutions. And some of these things have been revolved around waste management, wastewater recycling and use, kitchen gardening, the farming in small spaces, because we don't just talk to schools that are in the rural areas where there is enough space for farming. We also talk to schools that are in urban areas where there's no sufficient space for farming. And so we need to, spread the knowledge and understanding of how they can do farming in those small spaces without, without like destroying the environment, and at the same time contributing to mitigation of climate change. With the changing conditions in the world, the unpredictable weather conditions and climatic conditions, it becomes so harsh that we are most likely to waste a lot of water irrigating our farms, our huge farms. And also, it might take a lot of time and a lot of effort to kind of increase the productivity of soil in areas that are very dry. What if we engineered ways that we can use less water and improve the soil structure, while at the same time obtaining maximum yield from the small spaces that we have? Because if we are all on the same page, you will agree with me that there is one of the sustainable development goals is good health. And good health does not come without proper diet. It does not come without doing farming in a way that you believe that is safe for human consumption. And this is where we come in. An example of waste management project that will earn income for an institution and reduce waste from the environment is what you see on your screen. Using waste papers and creating some 3D paper mache kind of models for learning. This one is done by primary school kids who are doing these models, and they eventually have been able to sell some of these to other institutions, and they generate income, and they have been teaching other institutions in the coast region of Kenya. The idea that you have been able to impart knowledge in a kid, that he is able to teach other kids about waste management, relieves you the burden and the task to reach out to as many people within a very long time. It takes a shorter time to reach out to more, and this creation of a team of youth will help you, enhance your education program. Is very important in ensuring that you don't waste a lot of resources and a lot of time in reaching out to people. Advocacy and policy. So I talked about advocacy and policy a short while ago, but I'm gonna talk about it again in the essence of Wildlife Labs of Kenya and the fact that we are doing right now in Kenya. There is the Africa Climate Summit. Creating an army of future advocates for this planet is very critical in ensuring the safety of the planet. We can all agree that due to climate change, there is a lot of habitats around the world that are shrinking, and there are a lot of loss of habitat for wildlife. Even the population of I was talking about the reticulated giraffe, population is declining. Population of elephants in the world declining. Their home is also shrinking. So if we don't create a policy that will help protect this wildlife habitat, then chances are that in future we are losing. I don't know whether you have been, whether you have been going through some recent articles about climate negotiations, because I was reading an article and there was a mention that nations from Zimbabwe, I think all the nations from down there, Zimbabwe to Kenya, are in a race to regulate and maximize the benefits of carbon credit trading, if you understand what that is. So they are, enacting laws, establishing revenue sharing kind of agreements, and also advocating for the offsets, on African-based currency or other exchanges. So this collective effort signifies a concerted commitment to climate action in Africa and sustainable development across the whole continent. So this this movement will not be created if we did not create the right mind, if we did not have the right mindset imparted amongst the youth of today. we are not creating policies today to break them tomorrow. We are creating policies today because we want tomorrow to even improve on them and make them better. And so that's why we need to ensure that as we create policies, we are able to, put them in the hands of future environmental advocates who will help sustain the planet and also, come up with other improved policies that will help incorporate or rather bring together the efforts from all around the world, around the continents to protect the environment. So yeah, I'm talking about like when countries are sending delegates to the conference of parties for climate negotiation, they are sending people who have the passion to represent the country in negotiating for climate action. And these people also, have to be experts in those various fields. So even in the future, even as the climate change itself keeps changing, its phases from today to the future, we'll need people who are able to understand that the efforts that are being put in place today might be changed tomorrow. And so having the right policies put in place and leaving an opening in those policies for change so that they fit the future demands to mitigate climate change is a very crucial component in creating advocacy and policies. As we do this, as we try to create future advocates of environmental conservation, it's very important that we also give out current and truthful information to the youth in the learning institutions that we deal with or the community groups that we work with. One thing that we always forget is that we focus much on, like getting publicity, having people hear about us. And so what we give is just like the general idea of what climate change is and how it's affecting us. We give a general idea of the outcome of climate negotiations, but we don't go and break it down to the youth in our learning institutions. Do they understand what is going on today? Can they be able to argue based on their circumstances that they face locally? That's how you create a proper advocacy team. Yeah, you need to argue the points as they are in the current form, give them the truthful information, and also help them understand what the negotiations that are happening today are leading us to. All right. So let's be able to and willing to sometimes just break down some of this information, some of these negotiations, some of these conferences happening around the world for the kids, for the community that we live with, and what they mean to them and the environment. Even the policies that we have, in as much as we advocate for proper policy for implementation, we also need to make the community aware of what the impact of those policies is to them today and in the future. You also realize that in as much as we are out there giving information to the youth and the community members, if we are able to empower them and make them understand exactly what is going on, then they are also able to pass the information to their children, to their young generation. And this one, as the information trickles down, it relieves us the burden of having to repeat the same thing over time again and again. Experiential learning. They say, I don't know, I think I've forgotten, but when you see, you forget, but when you do, you remember. Okay? I have had the opportunity as an employee of my current organization to work in the field with lots of groups. And I have realized one thing, that sometimes you assume that, let me just be a little bit pessimistic. Like there's a lot of charcoal production in your area. You see that every day, and you assume that everybody in that community understands that there's a lot of charcoal production going on, and there's a lot of tree felling going on. There's a lot of illegal logging going on. You assume that people understand, but you'll be surprised that sometimes people don't even understand that is going on. They don't understand even the implication of what is going on. So it's very important that sometimes, in as much as things are very obvious, they look very obvious, take a group of kids or community members and show them exactly what it is in the field that is happening. Okay. And I don't know whether, I think most of us here are or will be in different fields in future. In as much as you are in the field of, say, ornithology or, let's say you are dealing with small mammals, do you ever take time to take kids from your area to see, for example, a bird migration corridor? Okay. Or do you ever take time, if you are dealing with small mammals or whatever it is, to take a group of community members or kids in your area to a bridge where the birds rest or roost at night? You see, I think some of us growing up, when we saw a bird flying by or a bat at night, we would want to, kind of just kill it, because we don't understand the role it plays in the ecosystem. Those birds hanging under a bridge somewhere, they treat that as their home, as their habitat. And that should be protected at all costs, because we know the role the birds play in the ecosystem. But do you ever, in your program, do you ever include programs that will take kids to just stand under a bridge and explain to them why the bats are hanging under a bridge? Okay. Do you ever take your kids to those wetlands in your area, to those vernal pools in your area, to learn about the significance of vernal pools? If you have been, if you live near a vernal pool, I'm sure there are days when it's very dry and there's nothing, completely nothing in the vernal pool. But when it rains and you go in that vernal pool, you'll see a lot of biodiversity coming up. Okay, you will see some tiny grubs coming up. You'll see some insects or some small mammals or some frogs in that, like some tadpoles in that pool, and you'll be like, where are they coming from? And then within that period when there is that vernal pool, you will see some birds. There could be waders hanging around that pool. Do you know why? You see it, sometimes you understand it, but do you ever take people who you presume that they don't understand why those waders come around that pool when it rains? You need to make them understand so that they can protect those vernal pools when they are there. Because some of these vernal pools are actually like roosting areas for the migratory birds that are flying from one area to another. So when they get to that place, they take a, and they know the specific time of the year that those vernal pools are full of water. And they want to be there. They want to take some rest there for some years, or for some months, for some months, or some days, or some weeks, before they can fly to their final destination. So as a conservationist, as a person who is advocating for natural resource conservation, environmental conservation, you need to inform people about the significance. Some of us have even gone ahead and converted those vernal pools into farms, not knowing that they are playing a very important role in conservation of environmental. It's experiential learning that changes the lives of kids completely. I happen to have done the reticulated giraffe conservation program. And one thing I realized is these kids just reside next to the park, but they have never seen a lion. They have never seen a giraffe live. You take them out there and they are mesmerized. You give them facts, they're like, oh, I didn't know that the giraffe is the mammal with the biggest heart. So some of these things, we take them lightly, but if we get out there in the field, the kids, they get to understand what that means, the environment, and what that particular species is for the environment. So let's talk about behavior change. So what are the impacts like of this, the impacts of this conservation education program? Behavior change is one of the things that happens. And I'm going to tell you like an example from a bigger scale. Right now, because of climate change, we are having a crisis with water. We have a problem, like most parts of Africa, especially the Horn of Africa, we have a problem with water. And this does not mean that the Horn of Africa does not have people living there. In fact, it has some rich people living there. They have dug wells or whatever it is, and they have water. But how do they use that water sustainably? In as much as you might say, I have my own well, you are getting it from the aquifers underground. You forget that when you get the water from the aquifer, you are getting water from the natural storage that other people would have used in that particular area. So, and in your house, you have a shower, you have a washing machine, you have a dishwasher and everything like that. and you have a flush toilet. Okay, sorry for that. So someone tells you, and this is where the issue of knowledge comes in and understanding, right? In your house, what do you think uses most of the water? Some of us, because we think, we go to we wash utensils most of, or maybe we wash clothes most of the time. We think, we are using a lot of water on washing clothes. So someone says, can we change your washing machine to a more or a less water using kind of machine? And you're like, I don't think that will work for me. But these are some of the behaviors that we need to change. Your toilet, the one you're using to flush, it actually is the toilet that uses a lot of water, because if you count the number of times that you go in to use your toilet in a day, and your system tank is like 10, 15 liters of water, every time you flush down 15 liters of water. Are you willing to change that kind of behavior? No. And once you start changing, you start promoting, you start to foster the sense of responsibility. That's one of the things we need to instill amongst the youth. And I've seen this, most of our institutions in Africa, most of us in terms of like combating climate change, we are doing a lot of tree planting, which I agree is a good thing. Although we forget that it's the least contributor to mitigation of climate change. Anyway, as we plant those trees, and some of these institutions, you find someone, like they would be telling the kids we need to do some punishment, and they tell them you need to go and water those trees. Once you start doing that, you are forcing kids to do something they are not in love with. So as they water the tree, they might even cut it. It will not grow. But what if you just give them the responsibility, you explain to them how important this tree is to them and to the future, and just let them do it out of their own willingness. Cultivate the passion among the kids, okay? That way you will build a relationship and also, kind of just promote the passion that the kids have, in terms of conservation. We don't need to this is where we talked about the question of why and what. Like when I come for school, I don't need a kid to tell me I'm doing this because my teacher told me to do it as a punishment. I need them to say, I'm doing this because I know the importance of this tree. I know its name. I know how important it is to me today and in future. That's what we need to do. Okay. In the process, we build relationships and collaboration to amplify impact. How? You see, in the world of conservation, you cannot be alone. Never. You'll never be alone. You need concerted efforts. You need a think tank. You need a team of people who will help you in achieving those goals that you carry. Because in as much as you are doing one component of environmental conservation, someone else is doing another component. So we need to be there and collaborate with each other to protect various wildlife species, regenerate those degraded areas, and help build a better environment and the ecosystem. So what are the challenges and solutions? As I mentioned earlier, as Africa, most of African countries, we have a lot of poverty and limited resources. So in as much as you want to talk about environmental conservation, you need to address the element of poverty, okay? There's no way you will talk to a community of people about climate change when all they have is just a liter of water for a family of about 8. Let's understand the challenges that people face first, address those challenges before we can incorporate environmental conservation and climate areas. We also face resistance, and of course, there are people, especially community members. Sometimes you want to get to an area and you realize the administrative arm of that particular area is not willing to let you in, or is contaminating the population, the community members of that area, so that they don't allow you to come into the area to implement projects that will help the community. There is the issue of corruption. I don't know what number your country ranks on the corruption scale, but there is a lot of corruption. And I think that's why some of for the grant writing process, it becomes very, very rigorous, highly procedural for you and highly competitive for you to get the funds. Usually, most of you realize that first-time applicants of a grant, very difficult to get because most of these organizations want to see, have you ever been able to do this? Have you accounted for this money before they can give you the funds. Poor government policies, environmental conservation, you are championing for tree planting. You want to reach a certain target. You want to reach like 12%, 15% of forest cover in your country. And out of the blues, the parliament enacts a policy that says we will now allow logging in our forests. And when I was talking about tree planting as being the least contributor, I'm going to tell you this. When a learned individual, a whole PhD holder tells you, we are just harvesting trees sustainably. We are only cutting the mature ones, and we are planting many young ones. I really feel like I want to ask them, how long will these young trees take to grow to maturity? That would be like 30 years. Come on. And a tree only absorbs maximum CO2 from the atmosphere when it's mature. So it doesn't make sense. If you cut the mature ones, you are reducing the impact of tree planting on climate change. If you plant the young ones and cut the mature ones, you are suspending. It's going to take too long before you get there. And I'm going to tell you, if you planted 1 trillion trees today as a country, that will take 30 years, of course, for them to get to maturity. And not all of them will get to maturity. Some of these seedlings will die. Say you will achieve like 70% of them grow to maturity. That 70% will absorb less than 0.05% of CO2 from the atmosphere. Can you tell me the impact that you are creating in 30 years? Does it even make sense? Almost negligible. But that's why you see when we go for climate negotiations, we are asking for these developed countries to do what? To donate money to Africa so that we can plant more trees to absorb CO2 from the atmosphere. But the thing is, they are doing that because they are heavily industrialized, and it is industrialization that is the major contributor to climate change. If we reduce amount of industries in the world by, say, 10%, we will achieve more than 40% CO2 reduction from the atmosphere. That one even combats climate change even faster. So I think you understand what we mean by government policies. And that's why negotiations happen every year. When they say COP28, COP29, how long shall we go with the COP? Negotiating each and every year. And people are still building new industries. Some of the countries, I would say like Finland or Iceland, they are running out of space to plant trees, and they just keep doing it. So it's going to take a lot of time, and this is just because of poor government policies. So we need to come up with solutions. And you see, policy still comes to what? It comes in solutions. If only we could understand that as a country, as a region, as a globe, that we can enact policies collectively that can help reduce our greenhouse emissions, then that way it would be very easier for us to work towards achieving this goal of mitigating climate change. If you run a simulation, you realize that countries that are like developed countries and rapidly developing countries, they are emitting a lot of CO2 into the atmosphere. And all we do here is try to mitigate that by planting trees. What if during those COP meetings, we agreed that some of these countries should just stop completely running some of their industries, you see, and help reduce CO2, not just by contributing to climate finance for the funds to go in the global south, but also help by reducing the number of industries and the amount of CO2 they are emitting in their countries. The results are very obvious, like the impact of climate change. If you go to some countries, they will see some trucks in the morning, spraying water in the air because they want to, reduce the amount of CO2 rising, or rather some of the greenhouse gases rising into the ozone. Why don't we just stop running that industry that is, producing that kind of stuff? Recently, we had the African Youth Climate Assembly, and there was this commitment that the youth are the most innovative group of population in the world. And so they are being promised that they will be supported to run innovative projects that will help mitigate climate change. How long will you be, running those innovative projects, yet your contribution to mitigating climate change is almost negligible? Let's normalize this. Like, most of this we are doing as regions in Africa. We need to be, that's what I was talking about. When you're doing conservation education, you need to be genuine. You need to speak the truth to the kids. Because if you don't, some of these kids will be in very powerful positions in the future, and they will not be able to understand that it is this policy that is bringing about a lot of issues with climate change. They need to understand exactly what is behind it, and then they can be able to help in the future. At local scale, no problem. Let's do those livelihood practices, because, as I mentioned earlier, each and every country has its own challenges that they need to address first before initiating any climate change project. And this is where we need to look at what are the livelihood practices that best fits this particular region or area or community. Once you do that, then you are able to start running the climate change project in that particular area. Let's also advocate for proper policies. It takes time, it takes a lot of effort, but at the end of the day, these policymakers will listen to you, will understand, and they will incorporate some of these policies that we are advocating for. And what's most important here is also collaboration. Collaboration at local level, regional level, national level, could be global level. Although right now I know there's a lot of tension. There's a lot of tension, by the way, going on between some countries, the US maybe, and China. There is nothing that China is allowed to import to the US, and because of that, they are also sabotaging attending the G20 summit. They don't do any, they don't see eye to eye with the US. And these are two countries that are very important in mitigating climate change. If they don't find a point of collaboration, then they will be running programs, or they're running policies that will have a very huge negative impact on the efforts that we are pushing to mitigate climate change. So call to action. So what shall we do? In as much as tree planting contributes very little to climate change mitigation, but that little counts. So it's very important that we continue doing tree planting, because trees are helping a lot in, kind of just trapping the CO2. We need to move to renewable energy. And this is where there's a lot of tension between the US and China. China has produced a lot of renewable energy technology, the solar panels, a lot of stuff. But, there are sanctions for them to export those materials to countries around the world by the US. And that's why they are having that, they kind of moving away from working together with the US and trying to come as an independent country to Africa to lobby for conservation and partnership. So let's try to embrace these renewable energy schemes and the clean energy policies. I think we all understand what clean energy policies are and what we need to do to incorporate. And this mostly will work at the national level, at the policy formulation level. So our need for advocacy is very important. As we lobby for advocacy, let's lobby for incorporation of clean energy policies in our government institutions. Lifestyle adjustment. I just talked about changing that washing machine that you have in your house, changing the size of your cistern tank in your house if you have a problem with water. Sometimes you can just switch off electricity completely and ensure that you save some energy, you save us some water in the rivers that we use to generate electricity. We also need to move away from kind of using waste in a manner that pollutes the environment, poor disposal of waste, lack of sorting of waste. I know most of the African countries have this problem because even in my country, you sort waste at the household level, and the truck that comes to collect the waste to the dump site, it does not have those partitioning to carry the different types of waste. So let's try to lobby for that. Let's try to kind of incorporate that in our behavior. Leadership, this is I think this is to all the young people. The good thing about leadership in most of these countries is people decide who runs the nation. So you have an opportunity to choose who will run your nation, who will run your country, so that we start looking for people who have passion for conservation. And this, once it starts at a small step, can start locally, but if we can incorporate and work together as a youth movement globally, we can definitely reach there. Knowledge sharing, as I mentioned earlier on, not everybody who is in an area that has a certain challenge understands that challenge. Some of us don't understand the challenge. It's important that if you know exactly what challenge a given area is facing, please share with them, give them the idea of how you can deal with the problem, suggest solutions to them, and also try to do some practical examples of what works for that particular region or that particular community. Let's incorporate some health standards in our lives that helps us thrive as individuals, because unless you work on your health first, you'll not be able to work on anything else. You have to be a healthy person before you can incorporate. So in as much as they are doing tree planting, like for us as an institution as Wildlife Clubs of Kenya, we also want to see that we don't just grow indigenous tree species, we also have fruit crops in our schools, so that participants of our programs are able to get food crops growing in a mixed kind of environment with indigenous tree forests. And that's where I was talking about, like permaculture as an example of things we need to incorporate in our programs. I've been so fast, but I want to believe that we don't have much time. I thought I would go as fast as I can. If you did not understand anything, this is the opportunity, and I want to give it to Prudence to take over from here so that I can clarify things here and there. Yes. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Silas, I'd like to say thank you on behalf of everybody for your very comprehensive talk. I think we learned a lot. I will give over to Londiwe, who's got the first question.
Thank you so much, Silas. My question is, what are the considerations when designing a conservation education program? Thank you.
Thanks for your question. So one of the most important factors to consider when you're doing environmental conservation education program is the objectives. You need to have clear objectives of what you want to achieve. You define the specific knowledge that you want to pass, the skills, the attitudes, the behavior you want the participants to gain when you are executing that particular conservation education program. So it's very important that you need to have those SMART objectives. Another thing that you need to consider is your target audience. The audience could be a certain community or cultural group. It could be a certain age group that you want to target. And this is very important. One day I got invited to talk to do a presentation, and I prepared my presentation so well without even asking, like, what is the age group? So I made a presentation for like high schoolers, and I get there, I find fourth graders. They're like, how do I adjust so fast? It's very important that you understand the age group of your group, educational background, the cultural background is very important that you also understand before you can design a proper conservation education program. Another thing you need to know is the curriculum and the content. So you need to develop a well-structured kind of curriculum that covers the essential topics that you need the audience to understand. I think I was talking about tailoring some of these topics because in some schools you'll go there and what they face is poaching. In some schools, you go there, they face the problem of a long dry spell. So you need to address, you develop your context based on what is most important and what is most pressing in that particular area. There are so many other things you can look at, like the local relevance, the hands-on learning. What, in as much as you're preparing, is it just going to be theoretical, or are you going to have some hands-on experience? Some of these things that you need to the audience to understand is not just theoretical. They also need to learn, like if you are doing permaculture, how is it conducted? How is it done? You know, and then also nowadays, I think one of the things that people consider most, even when you're doing a grant proposal, is the inclusivity and accessibility. Make sure that it's inclusive of all age groups, all people with all physical needs, and it's also accessible by those people.
Cool. Thank you, Silas. We have another question from the chat from Katana Baya. They say, kindly clarify why you emphasize that tree planting is the least contributor to climate change mitigation.
Yes. You see, the major contributor to climate change is the emissions into the atmosphere, the greenhouse emissions. And most of these greenhouse emissions are coming from industries around the world, mostly from the developed nations, okay? But for tree planting, as we do tree planting, we are trying to absorb or get back that CO2 from the atmosphere. CO2 is the major greenhouse gas that is being emitted by this industry. So we are trying to compensate. We are trying to get the CO2 from the atmosphere. The thing is, when you plant a tree today, because the emissions from the industries keep going and rising, but when you plant a tree today, it will take like 30 years before it grows to maturity, okay? So 30 years before it can start absorbing the CO2 at a maximum scale. So it will take a longer time for a tree to get to a point where it can absorb the CO2 from the atmosphere. And also, most of the trees, I mean, the forest cover around the world is so minimal that it does not have the capacity to match the rate at which CO2 is being emitted into the atmosphere by the industries. There is a climate simulator that you can use to check that. You realize that you can plant so many, I mentioned about 1 trillion trees. You can plant 1 trillion trees, but they only do 0.05% of the CO2 from the atmosphere. You see, it takes you 30 years, 1 trillion trees for only 0.05. So that's what I mean.
Thank you. We have another question from Kay Smith. It's a little bit long, but they say, the recent increase in tree cutting for charcoal across Kenya is very worrying. It will take too long to replace these trees, but we can all understand why people with no money have taken the opportunity to cut for charcoal. Now that the government have allowed this, we cannot expect people to ignore this opportunity for quick cash when they live in poverty. Is you're saying that this is a matter of advocacy to influence government policy as well as raising awareness at a local level? I don't think that this is a question.
That's a comment. Thank you.
Yes. There's a question from Lucy who says, how will carbon trading help in combating climate change and how effective will it be?
I'm not an expert in carbon trading, but I think carbon trading is a kind of market-based approach to controlling greenhouse gas emissions, particularly the CO2 from the atmosphere. This one provides kind of economic incentives for businesses or governments to limit their carbon footprint. And so what happens is that when carbon trading is happening, is that because countries, you see, countries that are giving money for carbon trading are mostly developed nations. What they are doing is that they know they are contributing a lot of CO2 to the atmosphere through industrialization. And so they are sending money somewhere for people to run projects that can help compensate for their emissions in their countries. That's what it is. And I think carbon trading is measured on a scale of like 1 ton of CO2 at a certain amount of money that I'm not very sure about. But this is, the whole idea is to ensure that as much as country A that is developed is producing a lot of CO2 into the atmosphere, a country B and has the ability to run projects that can help mitigate CO2 from the atmosphere, get these funds and run those projects, but they get paid at a certain amount per a ton of CO2 that they emit. There are various ways to quantify the amount of CO2 that each forest lot can emit or can absorb from the atmosphere. And I think once you get the specific researchers or specialists who can measure that kind of parameters in your forest, then they can tell you how much they'll be able to pay you for your carbon reduction.
Thank you, Silas. I realize we're actually very stretched for time because the students need to leave in about 5 minutes. So I'll take a question from Blaine, take one more question, and then go over to Dr. O. Thank you.
Hi. Sorry, I just wanted to ask, going back to the sort of using planting trees to offset climate change. Would it not be, I know we're not for pine forests per se, but would we be able to use vegetation that kind of grows faster than your conventional sort of indigenous vegetation, such as pine trees? And then also follow up sort of using to sort of bring it more into cities and stuff like that. Couldn't we, so I'm not too sure if it's got, the common name is speckworm, which is really, it sort of excels in taking in carbon at a much faster rate than what other vegetation does. So could we not sort of use that to speed up the process of trying to use vegetation to reverse it?
Yeah, or we could definitely do a combination, because we are doing like combined efforts to help mitigate climate change. I'm not sure about the bug you're talking about, but the whole idea is let's come up with ways, and that's why I was talking about like innovativeness amongst youth, and it's being funded by these developed nations, that you can come up with innovative ways that can help accelerate the reduction of CO2 from the atmosphere to help, kind of complement the efforts that people who are running tree planting projects are doing across the country, across the continent, so that we can accelerate the whole process of climate change mitigation. But when it comes to like measuring the amount of CO2, some of these pine trees can kind of like reduce from the atmosphere, I think it will score very low.
Yeah.
Even though they grow fast.
So it would have a less, it would help to a certain extent, like you were saying earlier, but not enough.
Yeah, not enough.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Sorry, Dr. O. Babalo, if your question is short, we could take it before Dr. O speaks. If it's short.
Good morning, everyone. I don't really have a question, but to Mr. Silas, on behalf of the Tshwane University of Technology, I'm a student there. So on behalf of the Tshwane University of Technology, the Department of Nature Conservation, we would like to thank you for such an insightful talk. It is very inspirational how you identify the impacts we as humans have on the environment and you take necessary measures. And I would like to say, keep on doing the great job, and we are definitely stepping into your footsteps. It doesn't end here, and thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pabelo. That was good. Thank you. And Silas, also from me, thank you. But I've also got a few questions. I've been running a community project for 23 years. And do you have a way of evaluating your learners in class, out of class, to see whether your programs are effective? That's my first question.
Do I answer that first question first? Yeah, so Wildlife Clubs of Kenya, one thing I would like to mention is that is a membership institution. And so first thing that you need to understand is that when we are enrolling members in our club, we offer an opportunity to them to enroll. And so I would call that random offering. So we already do random offering. And so you'd see those who opted into the program, how are they performing? And performing means, how are they performing in class? What is their behavior change? How is their attitude towards conservation? Are they running any other project related to what we teach at home? Are they sharing the knowledge? And how does that compare with those who did not opt into the program? So that's one of the ways that we measure how they are doing. Another thing is that before we start running the program, start doing our environmental education program in schools, we'll have some baseline data collected from these students, like how are they performing in class? Same thing. And how many projects have they been running at home? How many of them have even done like a tree planting on their birthday? How many trees have they planted in their school? You know, how many waste management projects are they running? How many campaigns are they running? Because we also do the advocacy things. So after we run the project for about 2-3 years, we'll go back and check, how does this compare? What is the outcome before and after the program? Although with this, there would be so many other confounders in between, because there could be a spillover effect or contamination from maybe another environmental organization running a program in a school nearby that they learn from, or some of them would just have those backdoor effects like motivation. You know, they just have the motivation to run this program. So we try to take care of those confounders and see what specifically is our impact. Another thing we do is called behavioral observation. You know, like before we enroll this kid into the program, how are they behaving, and how we get this information from their teachers. You know, occasionally, and I mean occasionally, like almost less often, we do what we call we do some ripple effect mapping with the kids and the teachers, and sometimes their parents, you know, just to map how much they have gained as a result of being members of the wildlife club in their schools. And that way we are able to measure the impact, both social and whatever it is that and environmental that they have created in their community. There are so many other things that we do. We could do a feedback system with the teachers, with the students, or just we do the environmental audits with the students and see what have they done, you know, in their school or in their community to assess the impact of their work.
Well, no, thank you. That's amazing. And do you actually also speak to their parents to see whether they're actually taking the knowledge gained home? Do they actually share the knowledge that you have actually spread at the schools and in the clubs? Do they actually tell mom and dad and granny and granddad
and niece and nephew? All right. So one thing, I'm going to give you an example there. The answer is yes, they do. Because I have had students, I have had calls from parents of some of the students, like they get to the college and they be like, I would like to run a campaign. How can we do this? Because our kid wants to run the campaign and we want to support her or support him. How do we do this? That tells you that they are doing these things at home. When I was working at the course, and I think my colleague might be in attendance here and will attest to this, we would go in a school and talk to the teachers and the students about conservation and ask how many of you are running any projects in their home. And that way we'll invite their parents for a different forum and they will tell us the same thing that the kids are doing, you know. So it's true, it's working. We don't have a direct entry into the parents community, but our impact on students reaches or spills over to the parents and the rest of the community around the school.
Well, thank you. And then the last question is eco schools. A few weeks ago, or was it last week? I'm not sure. Cindy Lee Kluter gave a talk on the eco schools. Now, I've implemented the eco schools at Indumu, and this is also linked to the eco warriors or my eco clubs as well. And what is the chances of you getting your schools involved in the eco school program?
I can tell you that what is happening in Eco Schools program is happening in Wildlife Clubs of Kenya.
Okay.
Because Wildlife Clubs of Kenya has wildlife clubs.
All right.
You know, we don't enroll like the whole school population, but when we go in a school, we have our own space for conservation. And the school administration is aware. They know the programs we run, you know, the field trips we run, you know, everything that we are involved in with the students, they are aware. So what you're talking about, Eco Club, is just like an equivalent of Wildlife Club in our case scenario.
But they also get the awards that they work towards, like the green flags and the international flags and that kind of thing. So is there a kind of a reward system for all their good work? I mean, Silas, you are doing amazing work. So somehow this has got to come out strong and get that award system going where it's internationally recognized. I don't know. We can talk on this one. I would love to. And I would love to even link you with Cindy as well. But, well, Silas, all I can say is you are an amazing young man, and you are changing hearts and minds, and you are changing the future youth. You've got environmental ambassadors, and well, thank you for doing such an amazing job with these young children, and you molding them. And I'm sure without you, they would not be where they are today. And well, planting a speckworm, as what Blaine spoke about, that's also nutrition. And just grow from strength to strength. And well done. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And if you need any conversation around this or linking up with us, my national coordinator is in the forum. She's raising her hands over here. She's called Dr. Margaret Otieno. She's ready to link up with you, and I think you can have a discussion. Maybe she has something to say.
Margaret, I would love to meet you and your team, really. And maybe that's what Kirsten and myself and Prudence and the whole team of Share Screen needs to do. We need to come see you, and we need to come and network, and let's do it. Let's get out there and network, and let's grow.
Thank you very much.
I am so inspired. Thank you.
And well done to Silas, and thank you for this opportunity for him. Thank you.
And with that said, Silas, thank you for your talk.